thoughts of Christmas and war don't easily fit together in our minds. The brutality of war seems about as far away as you can get from the loving kindness of Christmas. However, for those who fought in World War I, the peace of Christmas arrived right in the midst of a major worldwide battle. It was against this backdrop of conflict that warring individuals chose momentary peace. Early in the war, during December of 1914, many German and British soldiers took matters into their own hands on Christmas Eve as they sang songs and played carols to each other across the destroyed no man's land. And they found that even though they didn't recognize the words because they're in a different language, they knew the same songs. And then on Christmas Day, the German soldiers actually walked across the battlefield unarmed, shouting Merry Christmas to their sworn enemies. The hesitant Allied soldiers, eventually they crawled out of their trenches and they joined them. They began shaking hands and exchanging gifts and singing more carols together. And many accounts even tell us that a soccer game broke out on that battlefield that day. And it was played during a momentary peace. Unfortunately, the Christmas truce was never fully repeated again because high commanders made sure of that by threatening some severe punishments if there ever was. But on this particular day, enemies placed their shared humanity before their national allegiance, and they experienced the spirit of peace in a truly powerful way. I wonder if you could imagine something like that happening nowadays. Think about right here in our strange moment in time, the 2020 climate. Can you imagine and get your head around what that would look like? I mean, this must have been quite a sight to see. Those enemy soldiers sharing together a real peace, even if it was short-lived. In a similar way, God's peace can stir and take hold of us even when we are surrounded by division and disagreement and hatred and evil. God's presence, His peace, can penetrate the gloomy and painful circumstances around us, including raging wars and even just the crushing low points that we find ourselves in. Christmas, as it should be, is always thought of as a season of joy. However, as we know, it can be a pretty painful season for many people. And maybe this go-round, maybe this year, you're one of them. And I wonder what conflicts you are facing. What pain troubles you as you look around and you see the glowing lights of candles and beautiful Christmas lights and all the celebration. Now, we may not be able to end all of our personal or cultural battles that we are fighting this season. But even in our darkest places, we can lean into the God who is with us. And so today, we continue our Advent journey towards Christmas, and we are focusing on peace. Specifically, the peace that has been brought into our world by Jesus Christ, who is God with us, Emmanuel. And my hope is that today each of us will recognize and experience the comfort of Christ's peace deep within our souls. In the biblical Christmas story, the shepherds we encounter sometimes get a bit of a bad rap. And what I mean by that is that they're always presented as the outcasts, and they're always presented as these dirty, grubby, less than desirable group. Okay? And they were always kind of ranked near or at the bottom rung of society. And while they definitely did hold a lower place in the social order, that wasn't always the case. In fact, if you know your history out of the Old Testament, and certainly what we learn from Israel's history, is that shepherds at one point held a very high position. And loyal Jews would have known the stories of the patriarchs of the faith who were shepherds. Names like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and even King David. But whether or not shepherds of Jesus' day were totally social misfits, the occupation had definitely fallen in status and in admiration since the day of those patriarchs. So we have the shepherds here, and now on the other end of the social economic spectrum were the religious leaders in Israel. And they were self-righteous in their personal moral goodness and high positions of power. And they made sure everyone else knew their place in the Jewish religious system. They were at the top, of course, because if you're at top, you're going to make sure you're up at the top, followed by everyone else below. And they kept themselves lifted up by putting everyone else below themselves and under their feet. They believed that they were the only ones with a direct line to God. So in this dichotomy between shepherds and religious leaders, shepherds weren't exactly the ones accustomed to being contacted by important spiritual messengers. Things like angels. And they didn't expect direct messages from God. So imagine their surprise on that night on the outskirts of Bethlehem when the dark had settled over the landscape, and all of a sudden that sky began to light up with the brilliant gleam of an angel of the Lord. The Gospel of Luke captures the scene like this. He says, "And there were shepherds living out in the field nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified." So, that seems like a pretty natural reaction, right? Terrified. All of a sudden, darkness, boom, bright light, something's going on here. And then it goes to the next level of terrifying moments. This heavenly being begins to speak. The angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. And this will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." So, this is pretty unbelievable stuff, right? We have an angel shows up, then the angel speaks, gives them this amazing news, and then all of a sudden, even more folks are on the scene, and this is what Luke continues with. "Suddenly, a great company of the heavenly hosts appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, 'Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests.'" The angels were making a proclamation of peace to those on whom God's favor rests. And they were making it to these shepherds. Imagine with me here just for a second some of the confusion and some of the doubts that were likely running through these shepherds' minds. Like, God's favor is upon us? His peace, shalom, is with us? Maybe they got the wrong guys. But no matter what they were thinking exactly, this was completely out of the ordinary. No one believed that this was supposed to happen to shepherds. Supernatural run-ins with God's announcement team and promises of favor and goodwill didn't come to shepherds. That was reserved for those super devout religious guys of the day. And much like Jesus, and like much of Jesus' birth, this announcement didn't fit within the mold of expectations. Those considered by the society, by their culture, to be the most holy weren't even given the opportunity to go and worship as witnesses to the arrival of the long-awaited Messiah. The announcement to the shepherds that God had took on flesh and was born to us turned the religious system and the power structure of the day on its head. And it should remind us today, as it did back then, that God's kindness and his love is not based on human standards. Rather, and we know this, his favor is on all those who will humbly recognize God's goodness and then say yes to the gift of hope and of joy, and love, and the peace that Jesus brings. Now, back in the Jewish history, as told in the Old Testament narrative also, God gave the law and these commands to a man named Moses. And when God did this, he also set up the function of the priests to guide the spiritual life of all the Jewish people. And God gave them an ultimate blessing to speak to this community of folks. And it's a familiar passage out of Numbers 6, and it says this. This is the priestly blessing. "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace." The Hebrew word being used here in this blessing and throughout the Old Testament, as we just learned in that cool Bible project, which that's just a plug for them, the word being used right there is shalom. And it carries a deep and a powerful meaning. Its implication is so much more than just the absence of hostility, like we talked about in that World War I setting for that one day. Shalom, rather, it reflects justice for all. It reflects well-being and true wholeness. This is the type of peace that is brought by God with us. And Jesus is the Prince of Shalom, who was foretold by the prophet Isaiah. Here in Isaiah chapter 9, it says this, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever." In the time of Jesus' birth, the Jewish people wanted a Messiah to come and launch a new political and social system, one that brought justice for them against their oppressor. After all, in case you're not familiar, they lived under the authoritarian power and rule of the great Roman Empire. And this was not by choice. They were a subjugated people. But the Jewish people also understood and they longed for a true and lasting shalom. It was a desire that was fundamental to their way of life. And this completeness and this wholeness with God and with his creation is what Jesus then brought into our world. And it didn't just leave when he took off to go back to be with the Father. Now we recognize what true shalom is as the peace that sincerely and deeply quiets your mind when it is racing out of control. We recognize this kind of shalom with that deep acknowledgement that we can sing songs like "It is well with my soul" when everything around us is crumbling and there's just brokenness in our midst. We also recognize this kind of peace when it's broken, and that is sin. Sin really, truly is a breaking of shalom. It's a disruption in the wholeness that we all desire. Now, near the end of Jesus' life, he said these words to his disciples shortly before he was arrested and then eventually crucified. And he said this in John 14, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." Jesus knew his followers in this moment were about to experience a major punch in the gut. But he had a gift for them that was different from anything in our world. See, his peace is not given as the world gives, and it can't be taken away, nor is it just something that we can manufacture and make happen on our own. Because peace is a person. True wholeness is Jesus Christ with us as the Prince of Peace. And his assurance to the disciples was that even in what would appear to be the most hopeless of circumstances, he would be with them. And his peace is with them. And it's with us, too, no matter the situation. The Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Ephesus this way. He wrote it this way. He said, "For he," which he's talking about Christ here, "himself is our peace." And as we encounter and we experience the Spirit of Jesus Christ, we actually become knit together with and then inseparable from the peace that he is and the peace that he gives to us. Paul went on later in that same letter and he says this. He says, "He who has made the two groups one has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations." His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. Jesus Christ brings peace between God and his creation, which is us. And he also brings shalom between people as we are drawn together and we are unified and united by his Spirit. Christ is the perfect image of wholeness and of safety and of justice and restoration of all people as one. And Christ's peace is not something that, he offers his family members this idea to just agree to disagree. Because we all know, if we're really being honest about agree to disagree, means that I'm going to walk away with resentment and I don't really care. It doesn't really work. You see, Christ actually offers something different, that it's in him that we are actually being made one. It's in unity with Christ that we are reconciled to God and we are reconciled to others. See, for the shepherds, the promised Messiah's arrival marked the starting place. The starting place of peace to all of those on whom his favor rests and to all of those with whom he is present, which includes us here and now. And it is really neat that then the shepherds actually become messengers of peace. It's as though Jesus' arrival meant a kind of reestablishing of the role of shepherds. Because even in his teaching, Jesus would go on and use shepherds as an example of good things. And if you know this, you know your scriptures well, Jesus also called himself the good shepherd who loves and cares for his sheep. See, this type of restoration of wholeness and oneness with God and others is the foundation of peace. It's not a peace based on our class or on our position or our occupation or our stature. Rather, it is based on God's purpose and designed to bring good news that will cause great joy for all people. So let me encourage each of us in this final week of Advent to look for the peace of Christ, even when the disorder of life is taking its best shots at us. See, maybe this week you'll find this peace as you just watch the soft falling snowflakes out there settling onto our brown landscape. Perhaps you will feel this shalom in the warm embrace of a dear friend. I know we've all missed that. And maybe you will know it. You will know this peace as you sing such beautiful words in familiar carols. See, whatever life holds for us this week, may you find Christ to be guarding your soul with peace, filling your entire being with the wholeness of shalom. And it is possible, if you were at all like me sitting here this week or watching online, it's possible that the best gift of peace for you this season is that you don't have to be the Prince of Peace. Let me say that one more time. You don't have to be the Prince of Peace. You don't have to be the one on the throne dictating everything and making it all happen. You don't have to be the one that's in control of every single detail. Because just maybe your wholeness and my wholeness, your experience of what's real peace, what's true peace, comes through sitting, comes through waiting, comes from emptying yourself of your constant efforts to make everything and everyone right. There isn't some clear, and this is kind of unfortunate, there's not some clear, hard and fast list for us. If you do this exactly and exactly in this order, then you are clearly on the path to peace. I wish there was. Rather, as we've just talked about, there is the way of peace. And it's only found in the Prince of Shalom. So this morning, as always, I want to offer just a helpful step for all of us in how we can experience peace in a fresh way in what's remaining here of Advent season and really 2020. And it's not anything crazy. A helpful step is that we spend time in prayer and in meditation and maybe even, most importantly, in our frenetic pace of life, stillness. Because when we come to God in prayer, he changes us inside. And God's peace is able to bring a powerful transformation in our soul. No matter what we're anxious or worried about, we actually can come and bring our needs and present our requests to a God who wants to hear from us. And as we talk to him and as we sit in stillness and we focus on what is good and pleasing God, his peace actually begins to swell within us. And it begins to guard our hearts and it guards our emotions. And if you've ever experienced some of this, it is a very curious peace. We'd learn in the Bible that it is one that goes beyond our understanding. See, it doesn't make sense given the worry and the fears that we face, and it doesn't naturally exist in the midst of our struggles and all the strife and the things we're going through. But this is our Prince of Shalom that we are joining with. He is the source of wholeness. He's the giver of his spirit of peace. And when we come close to him, guess what? He comes close to us. Now, I know it's been a hard year. It's been a challenging year. In some ways, it's hard to even think about how many months have gone by where we've all dealt with unique challenges facing us every day. And I know that you're hurting because I'm hurting. And I know you're searching for something to remedy that hurt, to take that away, because I am too. And I want to encourage you today to turn your focus to the one that can actually cure your ache, and then wait for him to show up in a way that changes your reality, one that alters your perspective and fulfills your longings. See, the beauty of Christmas is not only that Jesus did come to earth, it's that he continues to come to us, and that he continues to come at our invitation. And he will come if we will wait, and if we will look, and if we will anticipate his arriving with clear eyes and hopeful hearts. And so this morning, as we wrap up our time here, we're going to pray together. And we're going to allow a little bit of space. I tried to make sure my sermon wasn't too long for the people with the young folks downstairs. We're going to sit here in a little bit of stillness together. I'm going to ask you to spend some time praying, meditating on what is good and pleasing. And maybe for you, in the just frantic life rush that is most of our lives, maybe just some stillness for a couple moments will be good for you. And so I'm going to join you. I'm going to have a seat. I'm inviting you to get settled in here just for a moment into a comfortable position. Begin to slow your breathing a little bit. And as we breathe in, we say this often on our Wednesday night groups, we breathe in some peace. And we begin to exhale some of those tensions, some of those things that are on our hearts, on our minds. And then I'll encourage you to take a moment and talk to God, or to sit in stillness.